News value is something that we talk about a lot in journalism, and fundamentally what it means is this story worth pursuing? Is the story worth reporting? Is it worth writing? Is it something that the readers will find interesting? And so we're going to talk today about the criteria by which we look at each story idea to determine whether or not it's interesting enough for our readers. News value and news judgment are really interchangeable terms. What we're looking at is, from all the information that we have out in the world, what are the things that our readers will find matter most to them, will benefit them most as a society, and that we can show to them as news. So what we look at is, based on the demographics and the values of the readers that we have, what would they consider to be important? What are the criteria that we can apply to different topics to determine, yes, this is something that our readers would be interested in, versus no, this is not something our readers would be interested in. Determining news value, we look at what I call the rule of 8, and there's really 8 criteria by which we determine whether or not something is worth covering and how much prominence it should receive, what kind of resources we should devote to it. Should we just have a story? Should we have a story in photo? Should we have a story and multimedia? How much are we going to devote to this story? So these are the ways that we're going to look to determine whether or not a news story is worth pursuing. The first news value that we very often apply to our story ideas is immediacy. Now, this doesn't guarantee that just because something is immediate or happening now or happening recently, that it will be a story worth pursuing, but it does give us some indication that the story may be worth pursuing. So we're looking at, did it just happen? Is it about to happen? Did it happen yesterday? Did it happen last week? Now, if something's happening now, we start to look at whether or not it is worth pursuing based on some of the other news values that we're going to talk about. If something happened last week, we have to really apply even stronger news values to say, okay, this happened a little while ago, but is it still something that will be of significance to the reader? Because that's the fundamental issue that we have to think about all the time. It's happening now, and the readers care about it. Why? So we would look to apply some of the other criteria that we're going to talk about now to add on to this aspect of immediacy. Proximity is another key component of news value. Depending on how close something is to your readers and how much it will impact them directly will enhance its news value. So an example that I've provided on the iTunes U page and with this photo relates to the corpse flower, which is blossoming here at the Ohio State campus, and it is newsworthy here. It's apparently quite putrid smelling and not necessarily something that happens on a regular basis, so when this plant flowers, we get a lot of local press on that. Now, is this a story that they would be covering in Indianapolis, or a story that they'd even be covering in Cleveland or Cincinnati, 2 hours from Columbus, Ohio? Probably not. It's not something that really has significance to other people because it's not close to them. So what we're looking at is a story that is made more relevant to our readers because it's happening in their backyard and it's something that they could go and experience themselves. So this aspect of proximity gives us a more enhanced news value when it comes to a story. Now, impact is something that we all kind of have to evaluate what it means to have impact for us. A lot of times it means pocketbook, so tax issues, which is the photo that I have for you here, and the story that's on the iTunes U course relates to a tax issue here in the state of Ohio. So if it's a local municipality looking for a tax increase, that doesn't really have as much impact on me as a resident of the city of Columbus as if Columbus City Schools was looking for one, or the city of Columbus. So we look for things that will have an effect on us, that will mean something to our lives specifically and affect our day-to-day life. Now, prominence is, we often see it with celebrities, so things that celebrities do are more significant to us than if a so-called normal person did the same things. Of course, breaking up with a boyfriend or girlfriend would not be newsworthy, but when Justin Bieber does it, then it becomes more significant. Here we have, as you know, thousands and thousands of students who take courses at Ohio State. We have thousands of students who come back to take courses at Ohio State after leaving. We have hundreds of athletes who take courses here. But when that athlete is Maurice Claret, who of course was a star on the football team, was arrested, served prison time, and then he comes back to finish his degree at Ohio State or to attend classes, that becomes more significant. So prominence is something that means when the mayor moves into a new apartment or gets a dog, it becomes newsworthy, whereas it wouldn't be newsworthy otherwise. Novelty, or something that's new or odd that's going on, something that is just surprises us, is also a great way to look at news value. So the story that I have on the iTunes U course for you that corresponds with this picture, this dog, actually a woman tried to mail this dog in the U.S. Postal Service, and it happened in Minnesota, so doesn't have proximity to us, it's not really impacting us, but it is weird, and so stories that are weird like this often will get play in our local news, and it's a story that we might want to pursue on our own, or we could even look to localize a story like this because it is kind of intriguing and it's interesting to us. The idea of a story having conflict behind it is appealing to readers, whether they're interested or involved in the conflict or not. There's a clear viewpoint from two different sides. There's controversy involved in it. And a lot of times we like to pursue these stories because A, they're interesting, B, they also have a continuation to them, so they may result in more than one story. The story that I provided for you on iTunes U has to do with Clintonville, a community in central Ohio that is looking at the possibility of a turn lane going from a major thoroughfare street onto High Street. And a lot of the neighbors are opposed to this. They feel that it's going to negatively impact the neighborhood. People who live on North Broadway will face the loss of some trees that are hundreds of years old. Part of their front lawns will go. So this is something that has been going on for some time. Each time politicians pick up the debate about this subject, it becomes a newsworthy subject because there is this conflict and there's the continuation of conflict. A lot of times when you read political battles between Democrats and Republicans, those conflict stories get a lot of play. Some type of clash of power will also be stories that we pursue in terms of having high news value. Sometimes we pursue stories simply because they pull at our heartstrings or they have some emotional component to them. There's some type of human interest angle that'll make us sad or happy or angry or evoke just some relatively strong emotion. We read stories about people who have programs that they start in honor of someone who died of cancer. Those are human interest stories. The story that I've given to you on iTunes U related to this slide has to do with John Lester, who pitches for the Red Sox. Whether or not you're a Red Sox fan, it doesn't really matter. John Lester was a survivor of non-Hodgkin's lymphoma who came back to pitch a no-hitter. That is a emotionally compelling story. It's something that has human interest and therefore makes it have news value. Currency is the last form of news value that we look at, and you can really think of that as being the flavor of the month. So if there's something that other forms of media are covering or other media that relates to your readers are covering, chances are you're going to be covering it too. So the example I have here, where's the birth certificate, of course, relates back to the birther movement related to President Obama's birth certificate. Many people thought that story was overblown at best, maybe ridiculous at worst. There, of course, were people out there who were fighting quite adamantly that he shouldn't be president because they believed that he was not born in this country. So that birther movement, whether you agreed with it or didn't agree with it, it was a story that was going to get covered in a great many areas because it was being covered in other areas. So that is what gave it currency during the time that it was being covered before the elections in 2012. The more news values that you can see applied to a given story idea, the more marketable that story will probably be. Just because something has immediacy doesn't necessarily make it worth pursuing as a story, but if it has immediacy and it has impact and it has conflict, it's much more likely that an editor will be interested in seeing that story come to life. So you have to really think about the reader. What is it that he or she will find interesting? What aspect of this particular story is relatable to them and will make them want to go through the effort of reading it? The more that you can make the story apply to them, the more likely it is that the story is something that they will pursue.